Okay, so I think by now most, if not everybody, has accepted that climate change, climate volatility, whatever you call it, is here, it's real, and we need to potentially do something about it. But maybe what's less well understood, clearly we have the big events and everyone goes, oh, we're all doomed. But once those go away, there's no necessarily real urgency or understanding of just how soon we might be, you know,
Hmm.
and particularly when say water supply, I mean, I think we're talking maybe as is it a decade away that perhaps,
That's right.
demand outstrips supply, perhaps.
Yes. So if current trends continue, the demand for water is likely to exceed supply in about 7 years, which is really very soon. And that's why the issue needs to be addressed. Otherwise, there'll be substantial risks of water shortages. And with climate change, not only are we going to be seeing drier summers, but also more extreme rainfall. And that needs to be thought about as well.
Yeah, and in terms of mitigating risks, I mean, all the stakeholders in the water ecosystem, we call it that, clearly have some responsibility, but the water companies are sort of front and center, already undertaking various activities. Was it fairly recently we had the announcement about the reservoirs finding, etc. And then there's the more general encouraging folks to use water more responsibly. Just your thoughts, I suppose, as to
Mm.
where the water industry sits within this and what they are or aren't doing that they should, I suppose.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, there is a role, and Affinity Water are doing quite a lot in terms of upgrading their infrastructure for reliability and efficiency, and getting better at detecting leaks, and also protecting the environment for future generations with initiatives like the Save Our Streams. And one that I find very interesting is what water companies can do with renewable energy, because with floating solar, you actually get multiple benefits. You're making use of uh, an area of land that can't be used for that much else. And the solar is actually slightly more efficient because it stays cooler and it operates better at cooler temperatures, and it reduces the evaporation from those bodies of water, from those reservoirs. And so I think there is now a much more kind of constructive attitude emerging. And there was a time when the model used to be one of predict and provide. Whatever customers wanted, then the water company had to just build more and more infrastructure to satisfy that. And that actually turned out to be a very expensive approach, and with a lot of serious impacts. And I think a much better approach is to use design and technology to improve efficiency, and for water companies to work with their customers to help them use less water. And there are lots of ways in which that can be done, which we can come on to.
Yeah, so in terms of one of those particular ways, as you say, there's lots of things going on. I think water smart home design is a particular focus at the moment. And you've produced a booklet, was it The Water Saving House of the Future? So I guess it'd be good to understand, was there a particular set of circumstances that when, oh, this is what we need to do, or is it just part of an ongoing strategy and this is the latest? It just
Mm.
why now, I suppose, looking at the household, the house and what can be done.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was involved. I didn't initiate it. That's something that Affinity Water have been doing for quite a long time. And so, yeah, this guidebook, The Water Saving House of the Future, I think it's actually a really useful, practical guide to support customers and to support them in getting better at using less water. And then Affinity Water have been doing quite a lot in sustainability generally, improving their the way they operate, and doing interesting things like supporting the rare chalk streams that exist in their areas. So it's not widely known, but chalk streams are actually a really precious kind of habitat. And in the UK, we have some of the best examples in the world. And over recent decades, they have suffered from um, various impacts. So it's great to see a water company really pushing that as a very positive initiative.
Yeah, and in terms of focusing on the guidebook for now, the what's contained in there, I think there's a lot of information. Are you able to sort of distill that as to what are the main ways in which households are encouraged to improve their efficiency through whether it's installing new devices, adapting existing ones? Yeah, what's the sort of range of options or recommended? actions.
So yeah, there's quite a big range, starting from the easy ones going through to the more ambitious ones. So some of the easy ones are using low flow fittings. It's very easy to add tap aerators, which mixes bubbles into the water and actually results in you using a lot less water. It also gives it a sort of slightly softer feel. Then you can upgrade to water efficient appliances. So next time you're changing your dishwasher or washing machine, you can choose one of the most water efficient ones. The guidebook also talks about ways of harvesting rainwater, so you can use that for watering the garden. And also thinking about how you garden and whether you might be able to move towards using more drought resistant planting that can survive in dry spells. And then some of the more ambitious things you can do, if you're the kind of household that really wants to push water efficiency further, you could install a grey water system that makes use of some of the wastewater from, say, showers. You could use that for toilet flushing. There are clever ways of irrigating the garden if you have one that use water very efficiently. And then you could, if you wanted to, you could install a tankless water heater. And then measures like insulating hot water pipes, that delivers several benefits. So that saves thermal energy because you're reducing heat loss from the pipes. But it also means that you don't need to run the taps for as long before they get hot. With good insulation, the hot water should come through very quickly. So that saves energy as well as saving water. And then one of the things that I'm particularly interested in, and I mentioned it at the back of the guidebook, is how we can take inspiration from nature. This is something that I've been focused on a lot as an architect, and how in the living world, there are some really amazing examples of water efficiency and water harvesting. Some of them quite kind of amusing and engaging. So camels, for instance, we could actually learn from the amazing adaptations of camels' nostrils to design for more efficient water recovery. And my office actually developed a proposal for a building that did this, that could capture water from the air in deserts and use that to irrigate an oasis garden. And there are lots more besides that, actually. There's a type of beetle that lives in the Namibian desert that can capture droplets of water on its back. So at night, it climbs to the top of a sand dune and it kind of raises its shell. And there are little bumps on its shell which attract water from the fog that blows in off the sea. And then just before sunrise, it tips its shell up a bit further and the water runs down to its mouth and it has a good drink and then goes off and hides for the rest of the day. There are also lizards that can kind of drink with their feet. If they're standing on damp ground, the water tracks along grooves in their skin all the way up to the lizard's mouth. And then there are certain types of cacti that have very specific shapes to the spines that can draw water out of the air and get it absorbed into the cactus. And so what I find inspiring about these is that we know that with climate change, we're going to be facing more and more challenges like water shortages and so on. And by looking to nature, we can find a lot of inspiration for how to develop more ingenious ways of doing things. So quite conceivably, that the house of the future could harvest much more of its water just from the air.
I mean, I also think you mentioned earlier on, it's not just drier summers, but wetter winters, I guess. And it seems to me if you could somehow, in simple terms, harness all the extra rain that arrives in the winter, I suppose that's where digging holes in the ground to a certain extent does that, the reservoirs. Maybe the more things, capture all that flood water and then, store it ready for the summer. That I don't know how easy that is, but I guess that's another thing to look at.
Yes, sure. Yeah, there things that you can do. So cacti have actually evolved to have ribbed stems, a bit like a sort of concertina. So when there's a rare but kind of large bit of rainfall, it can absorb that water very quickly and then store it for a year or more until it needs it. And conceivably, we could have similar things in our towns, cities, and around our houses that can soak up large amounts of water when it rains heavily, and that means less water will be discharged into the sewers where there's a risk that it could cause flooding. So by getting better at intercepting that water and storing it for later use, we're also helping to reduce the risks of flooding.
I just coming back to the household focus. Um, in terms of the actions required, I guess some of them maybe don't cost much, if anything, and others there is a cost. I mean, do we think the householder should be expected to foot the bill? Is the water company, is there a role for the government? Often, when you energy efficiency, it offers sort of grants and stuff like that. Any thoughts, I suppose, as to who should be responsible for the cost, or at least who should help decide how, how these improvements are implemented, and yes, that how the costs are borne by various people.
Yeah, it's a really important question. And the cheapest long-term option is to build it right first time. So when we're building new homes or new buildings generally, it really makes sense to build them as water efficiently as possible. And of course, developers work in a very competitive market. So it's not necessarily realistic to think that the change we need is going to happen voluntarily, from the business community. And that's where governments can play a role with the right legislation. Water companies can support the case for change and maybe even provide demonstration projects that show what's possible. And then customers can play an important role in minimizing water, using less water, and also perhaps making it clear that there is a demand for these kind of homes. I think very often people do want to do the right thing, but they don't always have the opportunity. And a lot of the solutions do exist, but we need to get better at communicating the fact that those problems exist, so people will demand them.
In terms of, you mentioned the construction industry and new build homes. I mean, as you say, it'd be completely sensible. Every new home has, a range of water efficient measures as standard. But as you say, the builders rightly or wrongly think it's going to increase their costs significantly. I mean, do you think, I don't want you to, go to war with them, but do you think they are perhaps not as whatever the word, I don't know, interested in these things as they ought to be? They hide behind, oh, it's going to cost us a load of money, when the reality isn't. They just need to accept that they do need to think about building, differently, and incorporating more efficiency measures.
Yes, well, it's a bit of a vexed subject, really, but I think a lot of developers could argue with some justification that if they invest a lot more in making their houses more water efficient, but they can't justify increasing the sale cost of that home, then they're putting themselves at a competitive disadvantage to others in their sector. And I think there is some validity to that. But what they could do is that they could get together and actually lobby government for the right kind of changes and say, look, we as an industry, we want to still be able to compete on a level playing field. And these are the things that we could do, but we need you, government, to play a role so that this is equal across everyone, so that there's a level playing field. And what has tended to happen is that there has often been resistance to change. And I think what we need to do now is get into a more constructive mindset where industry, where businesses actually cooperate in lobbying for the kind of changes that are possible and necessary, but need to be done in a way that it still allows them to compete on a level playing field.
Yeah, I guess think about water meter. I mean, water meters, I think they're compulsory for new builds, aren't they? So I guess that's a small example whereby everyone has to do that, so no one's disadvantaged. Presumably that simple example could be extended. I guess the question is how far you extend it and how much the cost. But some of the things you referenced don't sound to me like the addition of tap aerators, for example, doesn't sound to me a particularly expensive thing for builders to install. But I don't know if that's right or not.
Yeah, you're right. Some of them are really straightforward, and perhaps the kind of easiest way to do this is to mandate certain standards of water efficiency and then leave it up to the developers to work out what the most cost-effective way is of doing that. And yes, some of them are really simple. It costs actually nothing to add aerators to taps. It doesn't cost more to use water efficient showers. It doesn't cost much more at all to use water efficient appliances. So there are lots of things that can be done either at the time that the house is built or by customers. There's lots of things that can be done that don't have to cost a lot of money. And I think the key thing is to make sure you grab the the right opportunities. So for instance, if you know that you have to replace your washing machine, that's a really good opportunity to actually choose a water efficient one. Similarly with some of the other appliances in your house. And then it doesn't necessarily cost you any more. And if you save water, you also save on your water bills.
I mean, just talking about appliances, I'm intrigued there as well because I know they are generally more efficient, but you still often get the option to run things in eco mode. And I wonder, in my simplistic thoughts, why is that even an option? Surely that should be the default way, like, or even if I get in my car, it says, do you want to run it in eco mode? Well, of course I do. So why are you giving me the option? Is there any reason why people are given sort of non-eco and eco modes, or do we just need to get to the appliance industry as well and start saying just make sure they're all as efficient as possible?
Well, I mean, there are some circumstances in which the efficient mode takes slightly longer for various technical reasons, and so yeah, some people, if they're in a rush, they may not want to do that, and I guess that's why the option still exists. But on the whole, I tend to agree with you that this ought to become the default, so that everyone is doing the right thing for the environment.
And just one other thing that I know if Affinity have done or are doing is they've developed, I think with your help, I'm not sure it's your help or something, but a look and listen test when it comes to leaks. And I know leaks is the bane of the industry. They get hammered all the time for their, leakage rates, etc. But a lot of the leaks, as they point out, are, not in their pipes as such, they're customer pipes. So I guess
Mm.
they're helping customers to address the situation. What's involved with this look and listen test?
Yes, so a lot of leaks go undetected, and even just a slight drip over a period of time that results in a huge amount of wastage. So with some simple guidance, it's easy to prevent that. And the look and listen guidance encourages people to look out for things like damp patches on ceilings, walls, or floors as a sign that there may be a leak, discoloration marks, unexpected increases to your water bill. So if you know you're used to paying a certain amount every month and nothing else has changed, but somehow that your water bill's gone up, then maybe there's a leak. And then if you've got mold appearing somewhere, that can be a sign that there's some damp or leakage. And then you can do a certain amount by listening. If you hear something dripping, then it's really worth getting to the source of that. If your toilet cistern is making a noise long after it's flushed, then that suggests that there's a slight leak, and it's making that noise because it's still filling with water. So all of these things can encourage people to actually get better at detecting leaks and fixing them.
I'm just wondering, in sort of summing up at the start of the conversation, I thought it was a decade away, but you said it could be as little as 7 years away. I mean, to me, that sound, I can't think of an analogy, but it sounds like reason to panic. We're only 7 years away, and if taps are going to run, and you think of the outcry when there is a bit of a drought in the summer and somebody
Sure.
somewhere gets a bit short of water, or there are standpipes on this, whatever it is. If that's going to become, not if not the norm, more frequent, surely there needs to be a greater sense of urgency amongst all the stakeholders, and I guess we're looking at government to be the leader when it comes to how much of a crisis this potentially is. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it's a case of everyone recognizing the importance of water saving, and all of us recognizing the role that we have to play in driving that change. So that goes from governments through to house builders, architects, the water industry, and through to individual households themselves. And to some extent, I think it's a sort of cultural shift. There are lots of really quite significant shifts that have happened over the last 30 years, and thinking of like our sort of attitudes to maybe healthy lifestyles, to recycling. And I think we need to bring about something similar in terms of water, recognizing that it is a really quite a valuable commodity. It has significant impacts when we don't manage it correctly. And given this kind of looming mismatch between demand and supply, we all need to play our part in reducing water usage and trying to use it much more carefully.
And I have to ask, and you don't have to answer, but is part of the problem the perception of the industry? Again, unfortunately, the industry does vast amounts of good, but it only ever gets in the media for the wrong reasons. For example,
Mm.
do you think there's an element of customers thinking, well, if they're paying their directors all that money, I'm blowed if I'm gonna, you know, not turn on the tap, all that kind of, is there an element of that, or do you think most people can see beyond that and know that, you know, by and large their water companies are doing, vast amounts of good on their behalf, and therefore they shouldn't be sort of childish enough not to help them, if you like?
Well, I mean, there certainly have been some negative stories that don't help, but I think in other ways there's a sort of growing and more cooperative attitude emerging, that at least that I'm seeing. Businesses are actually very good at innovating and delivering solutions, but they need to be sure there'll be demand. Governments, I hope, are increasingly going to see that they do have a role in setting the right conditions for the long term. And I think increasingly we're going to see people tending to identify more as citizens rather than consumers, and that is quite a change. Citizens actually feel involved in society and want to be involved in doing the right thing, and water companies can benefit from that by developing a more cooperative relationship with their citizen customers.
And I'm wondering also as well, because everyone is, so when it comes to sustainability, net zero and 2050 is, I guess, everyone is hopefully aware of that, but this is going to happen significantly before. So is that almost a problem, that there's so much focusing on net zero and 2050 that this is almost going unnoticed, that, in a rather shorter time frame,
Mm.
something fairly significantly bad might be happening, I suppose.
Yes, yeah, I agree. I think there's sometimes well, I hesitate to say an overemphasis on decarbonizing by 2050, because it's absolutely
Sure.
critical.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that we can ignore all the other things, because there are actually a lot of other things that we really have to do. And one cultural shift that I often talk about is perhaps changing perceptions of how much we can influence the future. And when thinking about the future, whether that's the future of water, wildlife, or cities, we need to think about how we can shape that future. As citizens, as companies, and increasingly as both of those working together, we can determine what kind of future our children will inherit.
And I guess I have to ask you, when it comes to that, are you an optimist that we will do the right thing and get there in the right time frame, or do you occasionally wake up and think we're in trouble here, because whether it's the 7 years, or I know 2050 seems a long way away, but there's an awful lot of work to be done before that. Do you occasionally think we're if not doomed, we're no way near, on the right time frame, shall we say?
Well, funnily enough, that's one of the most common questions I'm asked when I do public speaking. I do quite a lot of talks at business events and so on, and that question nearly always comes up. Are you optimistic? And I say that I'm neither an optimist nor a pessimist, because both of those positions imply some sense of inevitability about the future, and the future is something that happens to you, and you either kind of feel positive or negative about it. I actually prefer the idea of being a possibilist, deciding on the future that you want, and then collaborating with others to help make that future happen.
Okay, that's a great point on which to end. So, Michael, I really appreciate your time. Some great insights into what is clearly a very complicated issue, but sounds like, as you say, I won't call you a positive, but a possibilist. It sounds like there is time to make a difference, shall we say? So, thanks for your
Absolutely.
time. Thank you.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, thanks very much, Phil.